Hello everyone. So today I figured that I would do the tissue culture guide that I have been talking about for a while now. So one thing I do want to get out before this video starts is that tissue culture is pretty difficult. It has a very small margin of error. All it takes is one microscopic piece of fungus or bacteria and the culture could potentially be ruined. So this takes a lot of practice to get right. It takes a lot of attempts and you're almost certainly not going to get it right the first few times. It took me like maybe over a month, to get like the first few cultures that would actually grow, not even without any contamination. So it's just something that you got to work at. Do what works for you. This guide isn't supposed to be completely strict. You're supposed to kind of try some new things, see what works best, and just do what works for you. This is just an idea of what you should try to start with and kind of a foundation to build off of. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and show you the materials that you'll need for beginning in tissue culture. So what I've made here is a big spreadsheet with all the things that a beginner might need for tissue culture. So just to explain a little bit about this is going to be the first link in the description. It's going to be on view only, so you can only view it. You can't actually modify this, but you'll be able to make a copy up here. Just do this file, make a copy, and then you can have your own. And that's going to let you use these checkboxes so you can check off what you have, what you still need to get. And I'll just explain a little bit about what this is. So first, in this B column, we have the item. So for example, the laminar flow hood. It'll have a link to where I got it and its price to the right. So that's the same for all of the following. And some of them will also have an alternative column. So for example, the alternative for a laminar flow hood would be a still air box. And you can kind of do this yourself. And then I've got an explanation. So you can use a laminar flow hood if you want, or you can make yourself a still air box. And if you do make a still air box, I would recommend watching a video or finding some kind of resource to make one, just so that you don't mess it up somehow. And that's the same for pretty much all of these. Now some I have added yellow background, as you can see on these, or the tween 20. That means that it's optional, and I also include that in the explanation over here, optional. So for example, this ppm is optional. It will slow down contaminants if there are any in your culture, but it's not completely necessary. You can do tissue culture without ppm, or without these two growth regulators, or without the tween 20. The ppm is just a supplementary measure to kind of keep contamination down. The growth regulators change the growth of your tissue a little bit, and the tween 20 is a supplemental sterilizer for your explants. And yeah, so that's everything here. If you have questions about this, feel free to leave it in the comments, but I think this is pretty straightforward. Now some of these don't have links, for example, the sugar, distilled water, bleach, rubber gloves. So those are things that you can obviously just find like pretty much anywhere, or you might already have at your house. So I just haven't put a link there, I haven't put a price because you might already have it. And yes, that's this spreadsheet. This is everything that you'll need, and we'll get on to how to actually do tissue culture. So step one in tissue culture is actually making your media. So I've got all the materials here, and I'll go through them one by one. So first, sugar. This will be used in the media. This can be either laboratory grade sugar or table sugar, whatever you have. This is 30 grams of it measured out. Distilled water. You're going to need a lot of this. This is going to be the majority of your media. Syringes. Make sure you have one that is small and measures in 0.1 milliliter increments. This one also has a needle on it, but you can just remove it by twisting. And you'll also want a larger one for measuring your media and actually putting it into your vessel cups. Your magnetic stir. So I've got the stir here and then the little pieces that spin. Make sure you also have some kind of like magnetic grabber for them so that you don't put your hands in the media, because the media can be harmful to your hands, more specifically these growth regulators. Measuring. Make sure this is accurate to at least 0.1 grams. Your vessels. So I'm using little plastic deli cups here just because they're cheap and they do well. But you can also use glass vessels or anything of that nature, as long as it's microwave safe or autoclave safe. Your growth regulators, so for this I'm using BAP as the cytokinin and IBA as the auxin. These two work great for carnivorous plants. Mirashige and Scooge, which I'll be calling MS from now on just because it's hard to pronounce. These are the vitamins that will go into the media and will actually give the plants extra nutrients to grow. PPM, which is plant preservative mixture. This is a material that helps slow fungus or bacterial growth in the media. It does not completely stop it, but it just slows it down so you can reculture them as necessary. And finally, your carrageenan. This is high clarity. Now you can also use different things like agar, but this one works in low heat, so I'm not going to be applying heat to this. I can just mix this in, microwave it, and then it will solidify. And finally, some kind of 1 liter mixing thing. Now you can also do this in smaller increments like 500 milliliters or anything, but I'm going to be doing 1 liter for this. So if you are doing smaller, just put all the proportions down, and yeah, so we'll go ahead and get into this. So for each type of media, I've gone ahead and listed the key in the bottom left for the ratio you should use for BAP to IBA. For callousing, it's going to get your explant to initially start growing. Dividing is going to get your plant to divide a ton and make a ton of baby plants. Rooting is going to incentivize root growth and make a larger plant overall. So always start with callousing-based media whenever you're using your first explant, and then after that explant has struck and is successful, that's when you shift to either dividing or rooting media based on what you're looking for. Alright, so now here's all our media. I've gone ahead and put it in a tray so that I can easily move it around. So now I'm just gonna go sterilize this. Alright, so the next step is actually sterilizing these cultures. As they are now, they're liquid and they are contaminated. So there's open air that got into here before I closed it. And you just gotta think of it like there's always bacteria and fungus in the air. And so anything that is exposed to open, like unclean air is gonna be contaminated. So these are all contaminated at the moment, so we need to sterilize these. Now the best way to sterilize is either high pressure to get high temperature or just temperature in general. And so I'm gonna be using a microwave to heat the inside liquid up, which is gonna heat the inside of this vessel up, which is then gonna sterilize it. So once we get that, we're gonna put them in this sterile garbage bag, which we're gonna spray down with bleach. So yeah, I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. So the materials you'll need are obviously your cultures, a large garbage bag that can fit all of them, distilled water, bleach, and then a spray bottle. All right, in this I show you how to make the bleach solution. So it's just 1 to 10 bleach to distilled water. Roughly, you don't need it to be perfect, just mix it and then pour it right into your sprayer. And you will use this inside of the garbage bag to keep it sterile. And this is me spraying that inside of the garbage bag. Just spray as much of the surface as possible and make sure you keep it closed when you're not putting stuff into it. And now to sterilize these in the microwave, we're gonna get the lid and just crack a tiny bit of the edge open. Not enough so that the lid comes off, but just enough that air can get through when it boils. If you don't do this, the lid will pop off from the pressure. Do at least 4 cultures at a time and do not stack them on top of each other. As for the microwave power level, you're gonna wanna put this on a low enough level to where the cultures boil, but not any higher. So go as low as possible. I found that my microwave does this at the power level 4, and you're gonna wanna have these boiling for a minute straight. Now be aware whenever you're taking these out, they are very hot. I'd recommend some kind of glove you can put on your hand that's heat resistant so you don't burn yourself. And do not grab by the lid. They are kind of flimsy when they're warm. Just grab by the sides and put them into your garbage bag. So for this last one, I'll go ahead and show you how I do this. Just grab them, open the garbage bag with your other hand. Now, of course, this is going to be pretty bad with recording in the other hand as well. You're just going to slide them in. Make sure they're pretty compact in there as you'll need to fit quite a bit. And then each time that you put a new batch in, just open it up and give it a good quick spray with the bleach. Then close it back up and repeat. All right, all the cultures are in the garbage bag. They've been microwaved and sterilized. So I've made sure to keep spraying the bleach solution inside of the garbage bag just to make sure that you maintain a sterile environment inside and no contamination gets in. So I've just tied this off and clipped it, make sure no air gets in or out. And now you're just gonna leave this for like 4 hours to cool, and I'll show you what you do after that. So it's now the next morning. These have all laid out for around 10 hours, which is more than you need to. You only need to wait like a couple hours just for these to cool down, but there's not really a penalty with waiting too long. That being said, I wouldn't wait for more than, like 2 or 3 days, but now all you have to do is just through the garbage bag, you're just gonna find the lip and click these closed. So it's kind of hard to find them sometimes. Sometimes they make noise, sometimes they're just quiet. But literally all you do is just go through all of these and make sure they're all clicked closed. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So I've gone through all of these. I've assured that they're clicked closed. Double check it, just go through it again and make sure they're all closed, because if you open this and they aren't, then they will likely get contaminated. But now you can see these have solidified and they're ready to go. So one thing I would recommend is, if this is your first time, just get about 2 of these and don't actually do a culture in them. Just leave one of them out in the open air. check if it gets contaminated, and if it does, then you know something in this procedure went wrong and there is contamination in there somehow, or you didn't microwave it enough and there's still contamination in the actual media. So if it's first time, I'd recommend leaving it out for like a week or so and just check that. And also you can use one of them, just open it up inside of your still air box or your flow hood and just leave it like that for about 10 seconds. Check if there's any contamination in the following week after you reclose it. And that'll give you a good idea if your still air box or flow hood is working properly. And the rest of these you can use for actual cultures. So that's how you make the media. All right, so the next step in tissue culture is going to be in getting your explant and initializing it into culture. So what you're going to want to look for here is anything above the soil. Whenever it's below the soil, it usually has more microorganisms on it, which can make it harder to sterilize. So I would always recommend getting stuff above the soil. So usually petioles or flower stalks are what I use. You can get rhizomes, and sometimes it will work. But it's, harder to sterilize just because of all those things that are on it because it's below the soil. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find a new growth, something like this fly trap which hasn't fully developed, or this one, or this one. These are what you usually want to look for, where the trap isn't even developed yet, or the cilia. It's just a petiole and a developing trap. But for this case, I'm just going to be grabbing this flower. Flowers are great because you want to cut them anyway, usually unless you're breeding stuff. And they work great for starting cultures. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna get some scissors or a scalpel or something and just cut that as low as you can to get as much material as possible. Cut it off, and that's all you need. Then just mark it on a paper or something so that you don't lose track of the identification, and that's it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and gather some explants here. I'll get some petioles and flower stalks, even though you pretty much do the same thing for both, but I'll go ahead and show you, and yeah, I'll meet you inside. So I've gone ahead and got all my explants I'm gonna use. You can see they're mostly flowers, but that's just because it's spring and flowers are in abundance right now. But I did grab one petiole just to show you that you can treat them the same. Whenever you're culturing, it doesn't matter if it's a petiole or a flower stalk, you're still gonna sterilize it and initiate it the exact same procedure, or at least that's what I do. So just make sure you keep these in the same spot, keep them marked so you don't lose track of them. And now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna sterilize this whole area so that it's clean to work in. I like to use these Clorox wipes, although you can also use 1 to 10 bleach to distilled water solution and spray your entire area down, although I don't find that to be quite as good as these. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this on. You're going to want to let your flow hood cycle in the room for 15 to 30 minutes. That's going to pull air in through the fan and blow it out and filter it all. So basically it'll just clean your room mostly. You're going to want to turn off any fans in the room, close any doors and windows, just so that it can stay, relatively stagnant, so, any air won't blow into this and contaminate stuff. So I'm just going to speed this up. I'll mute the video because this is quite loud, and I'll just do voiceovers from now on. So yeah, you can just watch what I do. So here I'm making the NADCC solution. The ratio I use is 0.3 grams of NADCC crystals to 500 milliliters of distilled water. So you can upscale or downscale that ratio to fit your needs, but I usually find myself using about 500 milliliters of this solution every time I culture. And this is what you're going to use to sterilize your explants. So here I'm making the tween 20 solution. I just put a bit of tween 20 into some distilled water. And this is going to be a short-term supplemental sterilization. It's going to clean the outside of your explant before it goes into the NADCC. Once your NADCC solution has mixed, you're going to fill each of the deli cups up about 3/4 of the way, just to make sure it'll completely cover the explant. This is going to be your long-term sterilization. And here I'm letting the tween 20 solution mix on the magnetic stir, just to make sure it uniformly mixes into the distilled water. And finally, you're going to get some isopropyl alcohol, put it into a flask, and this is what you're going to rest your tools in when not in use. It's going to keep them sterile so that whenever you touch things, it doesn't contaminate them. So I'm done sterilizing the flow hood area, and now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to wash these off in some water. This is just to remove the larger contaminants like dirt particles and pollen. And I'm just going to do that for each of these explants. And once I complete that, I'm going to bring them to the flow hood and then I'll get started. And whenever I'm sterilizing, I like to combine my different explants, even when they're different cultivars, and this will just take less time and use less materials, but you do need to make sure that you do not misidentify them later and mix them up. So I like to differentiate them. So you can see here, I've got on the left GJ stegosaurus, 2 very thin flowers, and on the right I've got iris, a very large thick flower. So after I take them out of culture, I'll easily be able to tell them apart and identify them correctly. And so I put these explants into the tween 20 solution for the first stage of sterilization. Now I realized that one of these explants was too large to actually completely fit under the solution, so I took it back out and I cut it in half. And now all the pieces are completely submerged in the solution to mix. And you're going to let this run for 15 minutes. It's now been 15 minutes, so I'm going to clean the outside of one of these deli containers with the NADCC solution. I cleaned it off with a Clorox wipe. And I'm going to take the tweezers that are sterile, pick up each of the explants, and put them into the NADCC solution. And repeat with the rest of your explants. Alright, so I've gone ahead and finished with the tween 20 sterilization, and I've put all of my explants into the NADCC solution. So you can see I've marked the top of their deli cups with numbers, and then that goes to my key with what's in it. So I've got, for example, in number 1, I've got 2 of those large thick ones, and then 2 small thinner flower stalks. And so the 2 small thinner are GJ stegosaurus, the 2 large flowers are iris. And so that's how I split them up and still identify them after. And you're just going to leave them in these deli cups with the NADCC solution for roughly 12 hours. You can give or take some, but I would not recommend over 18 hours because mine tend to get over sterilized and it'll actually kill the tissue and kill the plant. So this is what I do. I put it in a Ziploc just so that it's easier to move around. And yeah, so that's it. So I'll see you in 12 hours. So when they've sit and sterilized for the 12-ish hours, you're going to set everything up just like normal. You're going to wipe all the surfaces down with Clorox wipes and let the flow hood run for 15 minutes. However, this time, since we're actually working with the cultures, you're going to want to use a glove and a face mask to prevent you from touching or breathing into the cultures and contaminating them. And when you start, as well as every 10 or so minutes, you're going to wipe down your glove completely with a Clorox wipe, and that's going to keep it sterile. Each time you take a tool out of the isopropyl alcohol, you're going to want to let it dry out in the flow hood for about over 30 seconds at least. The isopropyl, if you touch a plant directly with it, it can cause burns and destroy the tissues. So when you take the deli cups inside of the flow hood, you're going to want to wipe down the full surface with a Clorox wipe. This is going to make sure it's sterile. And here with the dry tweezers and scissors, I'm grabbing an explant. I'm cutting off about ½ an inch off each side of the explant because those sides have been over sterilized and they will damage the explant. I'm going to drop that into my culture media, which still has a bit of water from sterilizing it. I'm going to wash it off in that water to remove any NADCC. I'm going to plant that explant into the media. I'm going to pour out the excess water into a trash can. And then you're going to wrap the area between the lid and the deli cup in the plastic wrap to seal it off. Now additionally, you can also get a label maker or write on it to mark what kind of plant it is. And here you can see the finished product. So you can see I've wrapped that plastic wrap around the top lid, and I'm going to repeat that for all of my explants. So here are the ones I just completed. And that is the initialization stage complete. So here they are 3 days later, and you can see that the media is now clear and the explants are still colorful for the most part. So I was going to go over 4 things. I was going to go over contamination, over-sterilization, callousing, and the kind of environment you want to have these cultures in while they grow. So the first thing is contamination. So this and over-sterilization is what you're going to see as a beginner a lot. This is just a pathogen getting in with the plant and starting to grow along with it. So sometimes you'll get something really bad and it'll easily take over the full culture super quickly and kill out your explant in there. But sometimes you can get a slower growing one like this, and it just grows kind of slowly with the plant, and you can see the plant is totally fine in there. So I'm just going to leave this alone. So the best way to fix this is either re-sterilizing your plant. You can just take the explant back out in a still air box or flow hood and re-sterilize it in the same way, put it back in, and hope that that cleared everything up. Or you can just throw it out and reinitialize the same cultivar, which is what I usually do, just because it takes less work. But basically, contamination just means that you either didn't sterilize your plant enough and something was still living on it when you put it in the culture, or your environment was not sterile enough. So like your flow hood has some kind of problem, you breathed into the culture, or maybe your still air box wasn't sterile enough and something got into it. So if you have some kind of contamination like this, then you can either increase your sterilization of your explant, or you might have some kind of problem that you need to fix. So the second thing you're going to see quite a bit when you just start is over-sterilization. So as it says, it's just over-sterilizing your plant. So you either left it in your NADCC for too long, or it was too concentrated, or anything like that, and it actually killed too many of the plant cells, and the plant is just outright dying. So you can see in my most recent culture that I just did, 2 of these totally lost like all of their colors and just look deathly when compared to these other ones that are still colorful and happy looking. So these were both probably over-sterilized and they'll probably die in the next few days, which is normal, and this is something that you should expect when you start. It doesn't really mean there's anything wrong. Sometimes they'll just die. Life is pretty fragile, and when you put it into these kinds of conditions, it sometimes just can't keep up and it'll just, die. But you can try, if this happens very, very consistently, like over 50% of your explants, then you've probably got too concentrated NADCC, or you left your explant in the NADC solution for just too long and it just over-sterilized the whole plant. So whenever I first started, I was doing 24-hour NADCC soaks, so I'd put them in the solution for 24 hours and then take them out. And that was recommended to me by a friend who it worked for, but it very clearly didn't work for me when I had almost all my plants over-sterilized. So I started doing 12-hour soaks instead of 24 hours, and as you can see, it turns out a lot better for me. So out of these, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 plants, I only had 2 over-sterilizations, which is pretty good rates for tissue culture. So if you do notice over-sterilization, then just try to sterilize them a little less, and it should, once you get to a certain point, you should start to see better results. And the third thing you should look for is callousing. So this usually happens, this is a 30-ish day old explant, and you can see near the media line, it started to go red and almost a bit bumpy. Now it can be hard to see the bumps on camera. The Deadly Cup does tend to, distort it a bit, but it is a little red and bumpy in there, and that is callousing. So basically, callousing is when the plant has responded and is starting to grow out of those points. So you can see on this one, it's going to start growing here soon, probably give it a few more weeks, and there'll be some growth coming out of this explant. So here's another more prominent example. You can see on the end of this flower stalk, I've got a big red bump, and that is callousing. So here, pretty soon, probably a few more weeks, it'll get a growth point there, and it'll start growing out of the media. And yeah, so that is callousing. If you see this, that is success, and that means you did a good job. And finally, a little bit about the environment that you want to keep your cultures in while they grow. So it's really easy. They have everything they need in the media. You could technically grow these in complete darkness, and they should be fine. But I would highly recommend putting them under some kind of lighting, whether it be a grow light or a shop light or something like that. Putting them under lighting will keep them growing healthily and in a good shape. So you can see that this one, it still has those thin, healthy looking petioles. If you grow these in super low or no light, then they can, react like a normal fly trap where they get those huge light-starved petioles, and when you take them out of culture, they'll be less used to light. So I'd highly recommend putting them under some kind of lighting while they grow. And second thing that I do want to talk about is heating. Some people will heat their cultures to help progress them faster. So putting them in higher heat will increase the metabolism rate of them, and it'll usually help them grow faster. I don't do this on purpose. My room is 77 Fahrenheit usually, so it is already somewhat heated for them. And yeah, so if you do want to experiment with that, you can. I just recommend putting them over some kind of like large heat pad and observing what happens to them. But I would recommend just getting the practice down initially, making sure you get decent success, and then you start experimenting and see what works for you. And here is a mature culture. So this is a Lagrosa guigi that's been going for about 4 months now. And you can see it's totally out of media on the bottom. And once they're out of media, they don't die, but they don't really grow anymore. So they'll grow quick while they have media, and then once they run out, they'll just kind of be dormant. They won't really grow, but they won't die. And this is when you want to take them out. So you can see it's in a big clump that you'll need to untangle. You'll need to take the living bits out of the dead and kind of split it up into what you're going to want to actually grow. So you're just going to split the living rhizomes up with the leaves. You're going to clean the media and the dead traps off, and you're just going to take them out. So here's an example. Sometimes they have roots, sometimes they don't. But you're just going to take each of those out and clean them off and let them sit. And then you're going to pot them up in a little bit, which I'll show. So you'll see here in a second, this was actually all it had. I expected way more, but it's fine. And here I'm repotting these. So I tend to use peat moss because peat moss doesn't rot these as much. I noticed that with long fiber sphagnum. They tended to rot a lot in the high humidity. So maybe do a 50-50 when you first start, see what works better, and then use that from that point on. But I pot these like normal, just like a regular fly trap. One thing you do want to keep in mind is these don't have much roots developed yet, so you're going to want to keep the media extra moist for the first few weeks. And then over those weeks, they'll develop roots so that they can take that water in from below better. But you just want to keep these really nice and wet for the first few weeks. One thing that you do also want to do is, from culture, these tend to be very sensitive to low humidity. In that container, they had high humidity, like 100% all the time. So you're going to want to start these off in some kind of dome. So you'll see in a minute here. This is kind of what I keep them in. I keep them in a dome. It'll be 100% humidity and with normal lighting. And over the weeks, as these grow, you'll open the vents slightly more and more, or whatever you use, and you'll acclimate them to your humidity. So here they are roughly 4 weeks later, or a month. You can see they've got quite a bit of new growth that looks really healthy and good. And so at this point, once they're happy and doing good in the 100% humidity, you're going to slowly start to acclimate them to a lower humidity or whatever your desired growing humidity is. So I'll start with like a little bit open like this, And then each week I'll open it a little bit more until eventually, over around a 4-week period, I'll have them totally acclimated to my regular room humidity and take the dome off. And at that point, you'll start acclimating them to your grow area. So once I get this dome off, it'll be, 4 weeks, I'll have dome off. And at that point, I'll get these going outside with a shade cloth. They are still pretty sensitive for the most part, so you do want to be a little careful with just throwing them out in the full sun. And so I use the shade cloth and acclimate them to the sun next, and then after that, you treat them like a normal plant division. So that's pretty much how you do tissue culture. And that's the video. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope this video was useful to you with tissue culture. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.